are a go. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another historian's interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining me today is a historian making her official debut here on the show. She has an MA in Public History with a minor in Museum Studies and Oral History. She has 7 years of experience working and volunteering in museums and works as a collections curator for the Mission in Museum. Her passion derives from her father's love for history and museums, and history was a bonding moment for her father and herself. She desires to inform and elevate communities through historical and educational programs and bring historical enthusiasm to public spaces. Although it's early in her career, her goal is to ensure future generations appreciate history's values within communities, identities, and cultures. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, historian Daniela Guzman. Daniela, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you for allowing me to interview with you and show a little bit of my experience and everything I have learned throughout the years.
Awesome, Daniela. Well, I'm so excited to have you on the show and learn all about you. So, just as a little icebreaker question, is there anything else you'd like to add to the introduction that was not covered?
That's a good one. Actually, no, it's pretty spot on, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, all right.
That goes into my background, I'll answer as the questions go on. But yeah, no, it's pretty spot on.
All righty. So I guess we'll just dive right into the first set of questions. So, in your bio, it says that you have an MA in Public History and a minor in Museum Studies, and you currently work as a collections curator for the Mission in Museum.
Mhm.
And also, this love for history sort of came about with your father, that it was sort of like a bonding moment. Could you go more in detail about that? Like, how did he sort of get you involved with history and just from those moments decide to build a career from it?
Yeah. So when I say bonding moment, it was more like my dad would tell us about historical events from antiquity to modern day. And I say was because unfortunately he has passed already.
Mm.
And he was enthusiastic. He always taught my brother, myself, my sister about historical events and how events that happen in present day are going to have some implications throughout history and the future. So that was pretty an eye-opening. Then he grew up in Mexico. He loved indigenous studies. He really liked his indigenous heritage that he had and what we have in our blood and our culture. And he really brought us to love ourselves about that part. Not only love ourselves, but also educate others who don't know about the culture or don't know about the history, the folklore and stuff like that. So we would, do spontaneous trips going to Mexico, go see the indigenous tribes and do stuff like that. But not only that, when it came to going to museums or like learning stuff from him, he was more of a one that liked the military history, the military and stuff like that. He was into all that stuff. And when he didn't like something, he obviously, just like your true Mexican father, he would voice it. Yeah, but that's something that I became gravitating towards more too. I began to ask more questions to him. And that's where he was like, well, why don't you go ask questions to professors or go to a museum and start asking those questions? So that's where I started doing it more. I started going to school. Originally, my objective was to become a behavioral my associates is in behavioral studies because I wanted to be an FBI agent.
All right.
the criminal minds people, learning about behavior and how to catch people like that. But then, with my dad and me asking questions and going back and forth, I began to connect more with historians at schools, more with anthropologists, archaeologists, and so forth. And that's what began to gravitate myself leaning more that area. I was like, I like this. Why don't I just go for it? Like they say, YOLO.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not go for it? And so I did, and here I am. And I could honestly say it was the best decision I've ever made. I really, really do enjoy what I like. And it's something, every day is something new. Every day I learn something new. Although I have my MA and stuff like that, I learn from others, and that sense of community in the historian field and stuff is really important. So I continue to learn from others. I learn from them as they learn from me. And yeah, that's how it is for me at the moment.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's very, very beautiful, Daniela. And your father sounds like he was an incredible man who inspired not just you but also your family. And from what you were telling me about, like him, like he really had this. He left a very good impression in you, and also for your siblings for this love, which that is incredible. That is simply beautiful. So you're welcome. So from that moment, would you consider, the transition from, from behavioral science to now working in the field of history, would you consider that transition your aha moment in the sense that you wanted to, pursue history as a career, or was it
Mhm.
a series of events down the road?
Actually, I would consider that to be my aha moment. Obviously, it was influenced by with my dad and all the awesome things we would do in his storytelling and stuff like that. But the transition from behavioral sciences over to history was my major aha moment. More specifically, let me tell you, it became mostly an aha moment when we had to dive into cold cases for one of my classes. Yeah, and it was a group thing. And we luckily got to look into Jack the Ripper.
Ooh.
Yeah, so the professor wanted us to see, see what you could look at, go into the archives. So there was a little connection into history, into archival and stuff like that. So that's where I was like, okay, well, let me see if I could reach out to, any police offices out in London, see what I could get, or in the UK and so forth. And I did. Thankfully, some are easily accessible, and some we got direct archival scans from um, police offices out in the UK. That's where that was another aha moment, but it was more like, this is amazing how I'm holding a piece of paper from someone investigating a killing of this mass murderer from, the 1800s. And I'm looking at the notes. It was just like, wow, this is amazing. And with my dad and that, it just made sense. It made sense for me to pursue it.
Nice. That's incredible. That is really, really awesome. And then from that, let's actually talk about, the schooling and
Mhm.
sort of like your academic journey in the field of history. So when you went into school to get your MA in history with museum studies, which is still history. I know people tend to view them as separate, but they
Mhm.
are history in and of itself. But when you decided to go down that path and working to build your career, when you were in your classes or maybe in your private thoughts in your dorm or just in the library or wherever, what were sort of your goals going forward once you've achieved your degrees? And what was sort of like the promise you were making in a sense that it's you worked in a museum or you worked for an historical society? What was your promise, not to just yourself, but also to the people, fellow historians that you'll be working alongside with, as
Mhm.
well as for?
Yeah. So one of my big promises I made to myself was to make sure I'm doing something I actually love and enjoy. Oftentimes, a lot of people are put in scenarios where they don't like the position they're in, or they're not enjoying of the position they're doing.
Mm,
So for me, I was like, I don't want to be like that. I want to be doing something that I know I'm going to enjoy and I'm going to love. And for those who want to go into this path, I say that's something that's very crucial. Make sure you truly enjoy it. This is something you really thought about and really want to go down the path. As for me, working in museums, I've always liked museums, whether local or large ones, art museums, history museums, or so forth. I've always liked them. Me, I currently work in a museum. I come from history museum backgrounds and stuff. For those who have worked with me and continue to work with me, often tell me how enthusiastic I am. And I always want to portray that. I want to portray my enthusiasm. Like, history is always interconnected in our everyday lives, whether
hmm
it be at a large scale or a local scale. There's micro histories beyond that, you know. And working in a museum, I want to be able to exhibit and show that. Um, if you ever decide to come visit me at a museum or so forth, I'm going to greet you with a smile. I'm going to, I'm not going to educate you and look down upon you, but I'm going to educate you because, like, this is something you should know because it's cool, and I want to make sure that, other historical societies that I work with or any other museums, anywhere I come in contact, they are, impressed by my enthusiasm, but not only that, my willingness to educate and to bring history to the limelight in other ways, not only with exhibits, museums, or academically, but providing more outreach programs
mm.
or, accessibility for others. I think accessibility is really, really important, and that's another thing I drive on as well. Mhm.
Absolutely. And I think that is, a very beautiful statement that you said, Danielle, because, it is, very, very true, and that's something that we're going to be talking about much later when we get to, the business side
Mhm.
of being an historian and, the business side of working in a museum. So before we get to that, let's talk about the decision to, work at the museum that you're currently in. So can you tell us, about that process and what sort of like the reaction like was for our friends and family? I can kind of guess that what their reactions might be,
Mhm.
but from like friends in general, were they surprised that you would go down this path, or did they kind of like, well,
Mhm.
we knew you were going to go down this path already?
Yeah, so in my close family, my mom, my brother, my sister, and their kids, they already knew. They're like, you should just go down history. It's your calling. It's something you need to do. They already knew. However, when I did tell friends and other families, they're like, really, history out of all things, that's not, it's not going to get you anywhere.
Mm,
Um, and most of my family drives from the medical field. They're nurses, doctors,
ah,
and so forth, or microbiologists or biologists as it is. Um, which, I'm the only odd one out, you can say. Um, and I understood their perspective. I understood their reasoning. But again, going back to doing something that I love and I'm happy with and I'm excited to go do, that's what, pushed me. And I've noticed them, they're not enthusiastic in their positions. And that's not me. I come home and I'm like, I can't believe I did this today. Like, this is amazing. I'll let my husband know. My husband's a mechanic. He's like, he'll like, cool, babe, cool. It'll be cool, baby. Yeah, sure. But yeah, there was some hesitation from, friends or other family members, which is fine. But no, my family, my intermediate family were really, really supportive and they pushed me. Fortunately, so my dad saw me graduate with my MA. And when I told him that I had changed my degree when I was behavioral sciences to history, he was like, good job. Good job. Then by me doing this, being different from my family, I inspired one of my nieces and one of my little cousins to pursue the, anthropology field, the archaeology field, or the history field as well. So
Mm.
that's amazing. Yeah, when it comes to museums, it's again, they never thought they would have someone in the family working in museums. It's something again not heard of in my family, and I'm the only one odd
Mm.
out. So they're they're excited. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, Danielle. That's really, really incredible. And I'm glad that your passion and your drive has inspired another member of your family to pursue a
Mhm,
field in the humanities because, as we'll touch on, later in the interview, the humanities, I feel, are the one job or one of several jobs where there's only like two paths for
mhm,
individuals, and we will touch on those a little bit later. But before we get to that, there was another question that I did want to hear your thoughts on, and it's more of a reflective question, but I think it is important to discuss, which is,
mhm,
in the humanities disciplines, whether you go into museum studies, anthropology,
mhm,
archaeology, or history in general, whatever, there is sort of like, what's the word I'm thinking of? You want to imprint a little bit of yourself into your field of discipline, whether you are specializing in a certain field within your area of discipline. But now more than ever, I will definitely say with social media, it is both a good thing, but also a negative thing. In the
mhm,
good side, yes, you're able to reach out with fellow academics, fellow like-minded individuals who share similar passions, who may have, a great following of people that you can connect with and build your own career and brand up. But on the other side, we do leave ourselves exposed to hate speech, trolls, spam, and sometimes, people just what's the word I'm thinking of? People assuming we don't know what we're talking about,
mhm,
despite the fact that, we have been academically trained and we have done the research. Now, is that to say that we will get some things wrong? Absolutely. There are going to be some things that we're probably going to mess up on, and
mhm,
we own up to that. But to say that we don't know what we're talking about, especially if it's some passion or a field that we're passionate about, that can be a little deflating
mhm,
for individuals in these various disciplines. Heightened anxiety,
mhm.
imposter syndrome, which is huge in the
Yes.
historical community because, again, people are going to say you don't know what you're talking about, you're far too young, you haven't gone through the
Mhm,
grind, whatever that may be. It can make people, second guess themselves.
mhm,
So for you, Daniela, once you graduated, college and you had your degrees and you went into the workforce, working at the museums that you've been a part of, did you ever have those moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And if so, or maybe not, what has disciplined you to continue going forward down this path?
mhm. Yeah, so I am one that has, I could, I don't know if many have, but I have several scenarios where I have had high anxiety, overthinking, like, am I doing this right? And imposter syndrome, most specific.
Mm,
Um, it's something that I would say comes with the job, comes with with being a historian or anything of that sort, especially someone fairly new or starting up. Um, Me, when I get volunteers or work with kids who are in the field as me, I tend to let them know, like, hey, you know, if you need to ask questions, ask them. Don't be
mm-hmm,
afraid to. Um, I've been in scenarios where if I ask questions, I've been shut down.
mm,
And I think that's a very negative impact to put on someone. Like, if someone's asking you a question, give them, the answer to your best of your ability. Um, Thankfully, after that situation, I've come across other people who were willing to teach me the ins and out and teach me the ways, they have learned, and I've been able to adapt to that. Um, but another thing is, you mentioned social media and stuff like that, and
mm-hmm,
yeah, nowadays, everyone could say, you know, you're a historian, you're a doctor or whatnot. When it comes to social media, you know, you have now these private space flights, and now everyone's considered an astronaut.
Mm,
You know, but however, another thing is, I don't know if you've heard or if people have mentioned, just because you're a historian, you're supposed to know everything. And
mm,
that is not factual. We
no.
have our areas of expertise that we know of. It doesn't mean I'm going to be like a thesaurus or a dictionary or a Wikipedia or Google, where you could ask me about, you know, Cleopatra and the disease she died, just to say, you know, people think she died disease or whatnot. Um, like, no, I don't know that. My area expertise is American history, from mainly from the 80s onward. I look
Right.
more of a religious aspect and how it affects, you know, government. I look at the separation of government and religions more specifically.
Okay.
Yeah. And everyone just automatically seems like, oh, you work in a museum, you're a historian. Oh, what is this? What is that? Like, I don't know. How about you look into it and let me know? You know? And they're
Right.
like, you're a historian, you have degrees. I was like, yes, I am, but I'm not Google. I'm not
Yes.
all that, you know. I only know what I know. And it doesn't, you know, it doesn't limit one, but it also, I think, prompts an historian to be like, okay, let me look into it just in case I get asked about it again or something. You know, it prompts you to do your own research or investigation, your own learning on that
Mhm.
subject. So yeah, you know, for newcomers coming into the field, ask questions. You know, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to have anxiety. It's okay for all that. You're gonna come across people who question your ability, yes, but don't let that shut you down. Um,
Mhm.
know your worth, know your ability, and know what you could bring to the table. Hmm.
Absolutely. And that actually perfectly segues into the business portion
Yeah.
of the interview. But before we even get to that, there was another fun question which I wanted to hear your thoughts on, because I definitely think it is important, especially now in today's climate, which is, you know, and I've asked this a lot from my other guests who are in the publishing world, but I definitely feel this could also relate to historians as well, which is, you know, during the lockdown, the COVID
Mm.
years, you know, there was a growth of independent creators, whether that's, you know,
Mhm.
authors, artists, musicians, and content creators, and some of which have been, you know, fellow historians. Fellow historians have been able to make podcasts during the quarantine year. Some of them have been able to, you know, just finish schooling
Mhm.
during the quarantine years, and that has also played a huge impact. And I've seen a lot of growth in, you know, the historical community, at least in from my perspective, that you know, a lot of great content's been made. Some
Mhm.
great individuals have been, you know, spreading history from different fields, from different aspects. But this sort of begs the question of whether or not we're in sort of like a golden age of independent creators, whether that's again publishing, artistry, historical content, historical research, scholarship, what have you. And a lot of my guests in the historian community, as well as the author community, have been, you know, divisive in the sense that some say that we are in a golden age, some say we are not in a golden age, where others go a step further and say that while there is an influx, an increase in content, let's say we go into the field of history, yes, there's a lot of scholarly journals, scholarly works. There's no passion behind that. And I say that very loosely because there may be individuals within that group who are passionate about the topics they are pushing in the field of history, whereas some, I'll try to word this as best I can, who are just producing historical content but not contributing to
Mhm.
the further development of history, just reiterating something that has been already discussed, but from another perspective. Not that there's anything wrong with that stance, but I can see how some people would view that as not contributing, but that's their opinion, and it should be noted as such. But for you, Daniela, in your experience and from your perspective, do you feel that we are in an era of independent creators? Maybe not a golden age, but definitely a new age of independent creators.
Mhm. I think we are probably in a new age. I wouldn't say golden age, but I would say more of an independent era, mainly in Indigenous scholar works.
Yes.
We're seeing an increase of that, as it should be. We should see more increase in Indigenous studies and ethnic studies more, mainly having people tell their own stories and have instead of having outsiders tell their stories. Um, that's where I see the increase, and that's where I would catalog as the golden age there,
Right.
in that aspect. Yeah, but I get where others mention of how we have historians who really don't contribute to the progress or the of history when it comes to academia or scholarly work or so forth. Um, I get that. I understand that. But it's still, I think it still plays a part that it prompts people to do it, to do, take that challenge,
Right.
hopefully, and for their generations. As in content creation during COVID, it was my sense of, you could say for me, I really enjoyed it. And I still do enjoy it to this day. More specifically, I don't follow specific people, so I don't really have a TikTok or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah, but I listen to a few content creators, yeah, who I feel have put out work with credible resources and actually prompt the mind to go investigate more about it, to others who just, I feel like, just go on and just say gibberish
Mm,
just to get, viewing or so forth. And the ones who actually take the time to do the research, to do all that, are the ones I feel should be looked at more instead of the gibberish ones, because you could tell the difference between each. On top of that, you could tell the enthusiasm, while others are like,
mm,
yeah, so I'm here to tell you about, you know what I mean?
yes.
Yeah, so those are the type of content creators we need to look at. I feel like, put more on display a little bit more. And yeah, the rise of Indigenous writers is what I would say the golden era, the golden age in, writing and stuff like that. Because that's what history needs. That's what, ethnic history studies needs, all that, the rise of indigeneity and stuff like that. Yeah. Hmm.
Absolutely. And that, of course, now leads perfectly to the business portion of the interview, the business side of being an historian, which I have a question which I recently started asking my guests because I definitely feel it is important.
Hmm.
So I'll get some context for this question because it is a very loaded discussion, and you can make a whole episode from just this one question, which is, out of all the disciplines, out of all the areas of study, you could learn in university or maybe learn in a trade school, I feel that the humanities, at least for history, there's not really a varying of pathways. And what I mean by that is there's only the academic side if you want to go into history as, teaching as a
Hmm.
professor. Or if you go down the federal path, that's working as a federal employee at museums, whether that's local state museums or museums in Washington, D.C., or maybe in other forms of government. And again, there's nothing wrong with either of those two pathways. I think those are very valid and necessary. But my point is that not a lot of people in the field of history or maybe even archaeology or anthropology may want to go down those paths. They may want to create their own path. What's the word I'm thinking of? Almost like a multidiscipline path where they're taking different aspects from different fields of study, different areas, and building their career from that. And I definitely feel for students in history who are still in college, there's not that option available, or it's not talked about as much. And for me, when I was in my graduate school, I want to say before graduation, we had a seminar called What to Use My Degree. And it was historians from all walks of life, from all various disciplines,
Mhm.
but they weren't your standard historians. Some were musicians who specialized in, creating music from the times that they have studied in. One was an author who was able to use his passion for history and create incredible works of fiction and nonfiction, which is kind of the pathway that I went down, and other aspects, which I think is incredible and necessary to have, almost like a workshop for students of history to really see that there are different avenues to use your degree. So, Daniela, in your opinion, do you feel that the history field and the disciplines in history, whether archaeology, museum studies,
Mhm.
anthropology, and so forth, should have something like this for their students, so to show them that yes, you don't necessarily have to go down the two standard paths. There is, a third path. Is it a little more challenging? Absolutely, but here are some tips and tricks to help you grow and to use your skills as to the best of your
Mhm.
abilities.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I feel like a lot of people outside of the history realm who don't, do any studies in history or humanities of that sort tend to view humanities only as, like you say, two lines. That's
Right.
it. There's no expansion, there's no other branches and so forth, which is far from truth. Um, I know right now at Cal State San Bernardino, California State San Bernardino, there's a professor in the history department, Professor Jeremy Murray. He is part of the graduate program, and he has developed of a program, and not a program, but like every Monday he has different kinds of historians come in and talk to students, whether it be museum works, teaching, federal, archival or stuff like that. He brings them in and allows them to come in and speak and let them know that there's other branches. Per se, recently he had brought someone in that works as a police officer in the evidence room, and he graduated as a historian, but in museum studies, and he does what a collections curator would do with the evidence. And he's like, there's continuity, there's overlaps in it,
Mm,
and that's something you can do. You have you have the medical field who are looking for medical historians,
right.
and stuff like that. And you mentioned, writing of fiction and nonfiction. That stuff, yeah, that stuff should be, I think, should be taught and should be given as an option to students. Um, Maybe, there might be some hesitancy, like, they might be hesitant towards it, but it's part of what history is. It's not only
Mm,
just two linear things, it's a over branching thing. There's so many ways, so many segues history could be so implemental in that it's not taught or acknowledged. And, in academia, that should be, if you're going to graduate school or undergrad or going for your associates, that's something that should be already spoken about. And say there's more possibilities for you to be more possibilities for you to do under a history degree than just be A, B, or C.
mhm.
There's A through Z, A through more. Like, there's a whole lot of things, and we just have to educate, incoming students or outgoing students, and like, this is a possibility for you to do. Why not do it? Mhm.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's why I think that, again, like we should have like these workshops that show,
Mhm.
students in history that there are other avenues and there are other places to use your degrees in history outside of the two paths. And
Mhm.
again, none of anything wrong with those two paths. Academic and the federal side are necessary and important, but not everyone is, interested in being a teacher, and some people may
Exactly.
not want to be, working for the federal government as a federal employee. That's completely fair and valid. And that, of course, comes down to, understanding, how you want to teach history. Because again, both disciplines or both roads have like a certain, not path, but like what's the word I'm thinking of now? But there's an expectation. If you go down the academic side, you're expected to teach history in this way. Or if you work down the federal side, you're expected to teach history in that regard with this
Exactly.
mindset. And some people may want to have a little bit more freedom to teach
Hmm.
history as well as broaden their audience. So
Hmm.
for you, Daniela, when working at the museums that you're a part of, how do you sort of approach that aspect of teaching history with visitors and sharing your knowledge with them?
Yeah. So the main thing when it comes to teaching history in museums is the whole decolonization of history. We want to tell the realities of what
Mm,
history, whether it be, at a local or a national level or worldwide. We got to make sure history is told correctly, not, not hidden. Not, we got to make sure we are telling the stories of the people, the micro histories, letting the community know and educate them about what, happened within their community, what happened on this day throughout the world or in the nation. I know in recent times, recently, the whole like the to bring back history as a whitewash thing is so problematic. But when you're teaching history, obviously you want to understand what age group it is and
yes,
who, but most importantly, who's willing to accept the information.
right.
And emphasize accept a lot because you have people who, us, as historians, we are out here trying to educate and tell you the realities of history, but you have people who come and challenge you on it.
Mm,
And they don't, either they do not like the realities of history or feel offended of the realities of history, but it's part of history. It's what's happened and what continues to happen. And we shouldn't be, as historians in museums or academia or anything, we shouldn't be limited to censoring history. Again, we should teach it accordingly to age group.
yes.
You don't want to teach about, mass genocide to preschoolers and
No.
scare them. You want to teach them appropriate things. As they get older, you start, changing that, and a lot of teachers, I've met teachers who go to conferences with their, parents of the kids and get offended. The parents voice their how they get offended, how the teacher is teaching this or that in history, and they have to, step, like if they're walking on glass in a way.
Yes.
And so now the whole idea of, decolonizing history, telling the realities is continue to be pushed back as it was trying to be pushed forward. It's
Right.
going back instead of going forward because people are not willing to accept the information.
Absolutely. And history in itself is messy. It is
It
not
is.
pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's going to offend people, and rightfully so, because there are aspects in history that are meant to offend. It is meant to be uncomfortable. And if we're specifically talking about indigenous studies, indigenous history, and if we look specifically in the Americas, North America, Central America, and South America, it is going to be uncomfortable. It is going to be violent. It is going to be up close, in your face, unapologetic, and that is the way it happened. Now, there is, again, if you're teaching this in school, you have to be mindful of the jargon you're going to use, because if you understand it, they're not going to understand it, and they're going to be confused by it and probably traumatized by it, especially if you're teaching at a much younger level. But when you get older, or I should say, when your students get older, you also have to acknowledge that they're able to think on their own and come to the conclusions themselves. You don't want to play down your audience or dumb down your audience, like
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge their intelligence they're going to figure it out. If I could just go off a little tangent, it's almost like if you look at cartoons from the 90s and early
Mm-hmm.
2000s and compare them to now. Now, I will say this, there are some great shows that are geared towards children that do touch on uh heavy themes, heavy topics,
Mm-hmm.
which is very good. But if you look at the 90s and early 2000s, similar topics, but they didn't, let's say, they didn't go the hand and fist or like really just shove down your throat kind of approach for some shows. Now, they understood the audience. They understood, okay, how do we get our point across without being too adult or mature, but not playing down the reality? If I can
Mm-hmm.
use an example, the show Static Shock, it did an episode on homelessness,
Mm-hmm.
and it was one of many great episodes that touched on real life issues. And I thought it handled it very, very well. And that's a case where they knew the audience, they knew it was meant for kids, but they trusted their audience to come to the conclusion themselves that this is what's happening, this is how we can fix it, or at least bring it to the forefront in discussions.
Mm-hmm.
And, give it the context that it needs, of course, but also not play it down, which I think is, very, very important. Same thing with history. You don't want to play down history. You want to give it the context it needs, but also help share it and spread the scholarship, because that's how history gets better. That's how it evolves, and that's how our understanding evolves as well. Which leads to another question, which I've also found very fascinating, is sort of like this balancing act between how we as individual historians approach history through our understandings, through our studies, but also being aware of the scholarship and discussions of the past. So, Daniela, for you, whenever you have taught history, either to family members or visitors at the museums, or maybe working on other projects, how have you been able to find this middle ground where you're showcasing your individuality, the knowledge and skills that you've learned in your academic journey, but also, I don't want to say showing reverence, but giving respect to the scholars of the past who have also talked about the subject you are working on or the topic you are expressing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when it comes to family, it's a whole different, dynamic because you're more
Mm,
comfortable with them. However, when you're in a professional setting, the the idea of being comfortable is limited because they're at the end of the day they're strangers. So
right.
you're introducing yourself to them as first time. This is the first time you're ever going to meet them and probably the last time you're ever going to see them. But you want to be sure that you're making an impact in their ability to understand or to educate themselves in a historical context. Um, for me personally, I don't dumb it down, if you can
Mhm.
say. If it's an adult, I speak to them as an adult. I, use large terminology and I let them know, like, I am educated in this, and we have a long time of many historians learning about this subject that should be acknowledged. You know, we should do that when it comes to students, to children. Obviously,
Mm,
the terminology is going to be different and it's going to be a little bit, I don't want to say the word, but a little bit more dumbed down.
right.
you know, um, so you know, I take that into consideration a lot. I make sure that not only is my knowledge shown, but I also, I'm gonna introduce myself. I'm gonna teach you in a friendly manner. If you don't like what's being discussed, you have every right, just as everyone else, to not accept the information and just simply walk away. And continue thinking that your way is correct, the way you learned it, the way you can, whatever you were taught about, which is fine. You have that right to do. But me as a historian, we have to come out, I have to come out as someone who This is probably the first time they're going to hear about it and probably not going to look into it or anything, but I want to make sure it's impactful for them to continue to think about it and hopefully go beyond and look into whatever they were interested in learning, if they were interested in learning anything, you know.
Absolutely, 100%. And
Hmm.
this leads to probably one of the probably most profound questions I have
Yeah.
in my interviews, which I would love to hear your thoughts on this, which is, well, again, I'll give context to this question. So I've been doing this show, The Wandering Scribe, The Wandering Quill, for about 6, now going on 7 years.
Hmm.
And I've had the opportunity to meet a wide range of authors and historians, from traditional authors, academic authors, students who are still in school getting their history degrees, reenactors, historical content creators, uh, historians who have their own podcasts, and so forth. And it's been incredible. And I've come to realize that as historians, there are two paths for us, or at least I think there are two paths, which is to be an historian and to be known as an historian, because both are two very different mindsets. One is
Hmm.
dedicated to the scholarship, to the discipline of history, and the other is dedicated to building a career and building a brand in the field of history. And both have their own set of obstacles and hurdles along the way, of course, leading to the same end goal, which is world renowned fame and success. But it is important to note that in the field of history, like the publishing industry, there is no guarantee your
Hmm.
first work, your project that you're a part of, is going to be the start of your legacy or the start of your career. It's unfortunate to say, but it is true. The field of history, as I talked with a lot of guests on the show, it's not an industry that's going to get you a lot of
Hmm.
money. As we talked about before, two paths that are, I want to say, going to get you some capital is, of course, the academic side and the federal side. But again, if you don't go to either of those and you try to build your own career, that's where the challenges arise, because
Hmm.
it's not a get rich quick money scheme. I wish it was the opposite, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, no. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are exceptions to the rule, of course. There's a lot of
Mhm.
historians whose first works, their papers, thesis, dissertations have been able to launch their careers. All the power to them. But generally speaking, that's not the case.
Mhm.
And sometimes, again, it's a hard pill to swallow. So, Daniela, in your opinion, with everything you have learned in your academic and professional life as an historian, working in museums and working alongside others in the field of history, how would you help either a student in history understand that, yes, there is no guarantee in this field you're going to make a lot of money, but that shouldn't stop you from pursuing history if you're truly passionate about it?
Mhm. Yeah. So I think when it comes, well, first and foremost, that's a really good question. It's a really good question. But also, I think one thing is, if I would speak to a student and let them know, I will let him or her know that there's no guarantee or anything.
Mm,
It is, a lot of people tend to look at media, like you have Expedition Unknown. But
yes.
a lot of people want to be like that. You have what's it, medical television shows like 911 and all these heroic scenes and so forth. And then you have like, military films that show the heroism and stuff like that. The
Right.
true biological ones, the biology, the true ones. Yeah. you know but I will let them know, like, there's no guarantee in anything. Make sure, and then this is going back to what I had said previously. I'm passionate about history. This is what I like to do. This is what makes me feel, you know good about what I'm doing for my work. That's one thing I want to make sure I implement in the student. I don't want a student to come into history, or someone, major in history because they think they're going to get fame and fortune. Someone as, like, with the Expedition Unknown guy. You-
Right.
And which is a lot of people's, I feel, perception of it.
Mm,
Or like you have a lot of famous Egyptologists as well.
Right.
But getting into the field of Egyptology, it's already hard as it is.
Yes.
It's very difficult. But also getting a job as a historian, whether it be in museums or a federal level, it's difficult as well. It's not a nursing job where you could go to a different state and get a job as a nurse. You have to, it takes sometimes months to hear back from a museum, or how, like, almost a year to hear back from someone. It just depends. That's one thing, again, going back, just not to, I'm going to reiterate again, letting them know there's no guarantees, and they should be doing this because it's something that they love and they like. And I know it's probably a little cliche in this, not saying that they love and they like this, but if you want to be impactful in your profession, in your field, having that passion, something, that you love and you truly enjoy, will get you there, whether it be at a local level or a broad range level. Your ability to do something, your ability to portray that, your ability to teach that is going to show. And a lot of people are either going to like it or not. And it's as simple as that. You shouldn't be afraid, or you shouldn't be limited to anything. You have the same abilities as others,
Mm.
and use that. You could be, do something about it, educate, develop exhibits, be interpreter for historic sites or state parks or whatnot. It's like you could do all that. There's no limitations, there's nothing like that. Just make sure make sure you acknowledge that you really like this field, you really enjoy it, and you're passionate about it. But then again, it is going to be difficult if you want to get a job. It is going to be very difficult, but once you get it, you're fine. You're going to be good. It's not, if the ability presents for you to become someone like in, Expedition Unknown or any other historical channels and stuff like that, more power to you. Congratulations, because that's a very small, pool. But also, make sure you use your ability for the good, you
Mm.
know, educate, to teach the realities, to, be willing of accepting and so forth like that. So yeah, that's how.
Absolutely. That's actually very well said, Daniela. Very well said.
Thank
And
you.
you're welcome. And as sort of like the last two questions, I'm going to combine into
Yeah.
one to cap off this amazing historian's interview. One thing I believe that is important to talk about in the field of history is, of course, networking and meeting, fellow like-minded individuals who are passionate about history and what else they could bring. And
Mhm.
I am a firm believer of that. I think networking is huge and necessary and essential in any career. So, are there any people you would like to give a shout out to who have helped you along the way on this journey of yours? And the second part slash final question of this amazing interview, looking back on your life now, have you ever thought to yourself in your own private moments how different your life would be if you had not pursued history as your main passion? And would you be as, I don't want to say happy, but would you be the person you are right now if you were not in the field of history?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer your second part first, and then your first part last.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have thought about it many times. What would I be doing differently if I wasn't, I would say, doing what I'm doing now? Honestly, before I settled down into history as an associate with my associate's degree, I changed my major several times
Mm.
before settling on behavioral studies and then going on to history. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna be like everyone in my family. I'm gonna do nursing, and I don't like blood. On top of that, seeing children who are sick and, people who are sick, I'm not emotionally well suited for that. I will cry. I will cry with people. I can't do that. I even thought about, going into police officers or anything, and, and stuff. And I just can't think about coming across, any hardship or anything of a negative sort of that. And it's just, I'm a people's person. I love people. I love animals. And, I love all the girly gits and stuff like that. But don't get me wrong. I love true crime. Who doesn't, I love true crime, but me putting myself in that situation, try to investigate something like that, probably not. It was more of a fascination, it would say. I would think, if I did go pursue those rounds, maybe I would have enjoyed if I, stayed into it, but then also would I have loved it? That's my thing. Like, would I have loved it? And my father played a really important role in my life where he always said, do something you love, make sure you do good by it. If you're going to
Right.
do something, make sure you do it right and with love,
Mm-hmm.
And I live by that standard a lot. I do. And so I'm so glad I stayed in this history realm. I stayed in where I am now because I love what I do. Yeah, I sometimes I come home frustrated, tired because of traffic or because someone I met, they were questioning my abilities and so forth, but that doesn't limit me or doesn't stop me from improving on myself and enjoying the things I do. That
Right.
doesn't stop me, and it shouldn't stop anyone. It shouldn't. Um, as to your first part of the question, obviously my mom, my dad, my siblings, my husband were they were my main supporters, but also the history program, the graduate history program in Cal State San Bernardino, they're really good. They get to know the students at a personal and an academic level, and they're there for you to help you in anything you need. Their accessibility to them, to the professors, is great, and I love that. To them, you're not considered a number, you're considered a person, and they get to know you and actually help you in what ways to, develop yourself as being something more than just a historian. You could do so much more. They'll push you. On top of that, my previous predecessor is Jennifer Dickerson. She's a curator at the Museum of Riverside. She has taught me a lot. She took me under her wing. I learned so much from her, not only patience and consideration, but the ins and out of what museum works is all about. And then I have my fellow cohort from my MA, which is a combination of an indigenous Hawaiian and indigenous peoples of the Americas, and I've learned so much from them, from their perspective, and I love and adore them. And I love the fact that we're still connected and helping one another of that. And then I would say also Dr. Michael Deutsch, he has helped me a lot when it comes to my professionalism and putting myself out there as well in the world of history with networking and applying for positions and stuff like that. I'm not gonna lie, I'm someone who is kind of a little bit reserved. When you first meet me, I'm kind of quiet and I get a little intimidated by others and stuff. But once I get to know you, once I push myself out of the box, which Dr. Deutsch has taught me, you could do it. Don't limit yourself, know your worth. And that's that's where I get that from a lot. He has pushed me to I could do this. I know I can. Don't be afraid. Don't let that imposter syndrome get the best of you. And yeah, it's those people I would say are the main people who've helped me get to where I am today. And I hopefully become something even more where I want to help. Again, I've been helped so much and I want to bring that back to others.
Absolutely.
Same, yeah.
Shout out to Dr. Deutsch too, because
Yeah.
he's an incredible individual, and I was very, very lucky to have him on my show. And he is
He's
very
awesome.
knowledgeable. He is.
Yeah.
I have to clip this part right here so that we knows. Hey, you were just shout out on Daniela's interview, which I think he'll get a laugh out of that. He'll really enjoy
Yeah,
that.
he is awesome. Whoever who doesn't know him, I recommend you reaching out to him. He's not only an incredible person, he's extremely knowledgeable. Yeah, he's incredible. As yeah.
Awesome. And
Mhm.
with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another amazing historians interview here on the channel. Want to give a huge thank you to Daniela Guzman for making her official debut here on the show. We wish her the very best,
Mhm.
and hopefully this will not be the last time. And if you've seen my other historians interviews, I have mentioned at the end that I am going to be looking for guests for season 4 of the Historians Lounge, as well as the rest of season 3 of this year. So who knows? Danielle could probably make a return to the show this year very soon in season 3, or be a part of the headline group for season 4. If you want to have her back on the show, comment down below. And Daniela, before we officially end, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and chat with you? And do you have any projects that you are working on, either in a group, any events that you're being a part of, anything at all?
Well, yeah. So you guys, I mean, not only can you guys find me on LinkedIn, as you know, Daniela Guzman Bedoya, but also you guys can find me on Instagram as Guzman Bedoya Danny underscore. You guys can find me there. If anyone has any questions, please reach out. I'm open. And then what was your last part? I'm so sorry.
Uh, any projects or
Oh
events that
yeah.
you're going to be a part of?
Currently not at the moment. Right now, the only project I have ongoing is getting everything organized for the Mission and Museum, the foundation. Their collections is in works right now. We have new items, historical items coming in, came in, which
Mm.
implements to the ongoing and the continuous growing of what Riverside County was and is all about. So yeah, if you guys, anyone's interested, I recommend you guys going to missionandfoundation.com, checking this out. There is no really exhibit yet going on or anything. Everything's in the works. Everything's still brand new. So we hope to see the increase of foot traffic come in sometime. Yeah.
Awesome. I will link that down below in the description of this video as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again for another amazing historians interview. A huge thank you to Daniela for making her official debut here on the channel. We wish her the very best from one historian to another. And as always, viewers and listeners, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And as always, it's the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And until next time, we'll see you soon.